Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Madao Wejira. Thank you for joining. Salibonani lonke makadini jenyu. Today we are going to be canning tomatoes. This is a method that's going to help us to be able to preserve tomatoes if you do not have a reliable electricity source. Even if you do have a reliable electricity source, this is still a great method of storing tomatoes if you'd like to, try it out. For this canning method, you'll need a glass jar with a lid, tomatoes, a blender or a grater, salt, a saucepan, and the pot that you will use to boil the jar of oil. I have washed our tomatoes and I'm going to be using roughly 5 tomatoes for this, and I am going to be using a 160 gram bottle jar. It had olives, so I'm recycling. You do not need to go and buy new jars, you just use what you already have. So you can, if you are in a country that doesn't have reliable electricity, you can use a grater, or if you do have some electricity and you manage to happen to have time with electricity that day, use a blender. Either way, you're still going to have the same result. I also have, as I said, my little pot and a big pot. Like if I had many jars, I would need such a big pot, but because I only have one jar, I will just have to use a smaller pot for this method. Anyway, okay, so I've grated as much as I can out of this tomato, and I'll finish off the rest of my tomatoes in the blender, but basically that is the method. You grate it until you have a watery paste. As I mentioned, I shall use my blender to do the rest of it because it was... You might need to add some water if the tomatoes are really fresh like this one, as I mentioned, because okay, so I blended these tomatoes for about 30 seconds. So depending on the strength of your blender, you might have to blend them for longer or shorter. Just for the purposes of showing everybody how much there is in here, I'm going to pour the liquid, the tomato paste, into the container so that we can see how much we got. So this one was the grated one, this one is the blended one. So we got a substantial amount, half of this tin. So those 5 tomatoes that were in here, they ended up being here. Not bad, not bad at all. Okay, so now we're going to pour the tomato mix into the fire. So our tomatoes are halfway through the boil, so you just make sure you keep stirring it so that it doesn't burn at the bottom of the pot. And then you also add some salt. Salt acts as a preservative. That's how you're going to preserve the tomatoes. And then continue to stir. You can boil it for another maybe 5-10 minutes until you can tell that it's blended very well. So far this was just 3 minutes into the boiling process. So if we give it another 5 minutes. Okay, so the water has drained out and now we just have pure tomato puree. Oh, wonderful. Okay, a few more minutes and we will be able to switch off, but you can tell that all that water is drained and we are now left with tomato. Wonderful. Alright, so we have completely finished the water. As you can see, it's now almost burning at the bottom of the pot and there's no more water. So we now just have pure tomato. Now we can start scooping it into the jar. Dry your jar completely and then start emptying out the puree into the jar. Yeah, so 5 tomatoes of paste. The water is drained, so this is just pure tomato. Make sure you completely dry the lid. There is no liquid whatsoever in the lid, and you clean around the surface of the jar. Then you shut it tightly, and then we will now continue the canning process by boiling for another 30 minutes. After 45 minutes, you can get the tomato out. It'll be very hot, so please use something safe. I used some tongs, but please, whatever you do, be safe. And cover the tomatoes, the lids, not the jar necessarily, like that, with a dishcloth or a blanket overnight, or for as long as you can. You doing this means that the heat doesn't go out quickly, and the heat will ensure that the tomatoes are properly preserved. So by putting a blanket, it keeps in the heat for longer. It's just a better way of preserving your tomatoes. It's not a big deal if you don't have a dishcloth or a blanket, but it's just the suggested method that was taught to me. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this useful.